frustration and humiliation that this person is having to go through in front of an audience, while this guy right here is giving her the fucking side glare. This woman right here is just, what? This whole thing, this woman's like whispering to her best friend back there, like, this girl's crazy. This girl's nuts. This is my jam. Watching conspiracy theorists make absolute fools of themselves, it unironically inoculates whoever's watching from their bullshit. This is like when a flat earther does a correctly procedured laser test to try to tell if the earth is flat, and they find out that actually, no, there is curvature, or a flat earth is like up in a hot air balloon, high enough to actually see curvature. Like, anytime shit like that happens, it is hilarious. It gives me every single ounce of joy. Xander says the bad thing is that apparently this person is one of the ones that was most responsible for the spread of anti-vax propaganda via Facebook and Twitter. God, there's a video that I wanted to make ages ago, and I just stopped collecting stuff for it, and it was called "Your Mom Posts Stupid Stuff to Facebook" or something like that, and it was supposed to be like all of these like mom conspiracy theories where they would just post, again, this is like the, if I put mercury in your son's veins, I'd be a terrorist, but if you put, but if a doctor does it, then it's legal. Like, that whole thing, it's wonderful. Also, thank you very much, the Mannequin, for the raid. What were you guys doing? Hopefully you guys were having a wonderful time over there. Hopefully your stream ended up going well.
Sabe quando aquela dor de costas pede uma massagem? Graças à sua consistência fluida, Revolução é indicado para massajar no local da dor. Revolução, mais forte que isso.
We are here laughing at conspiracy theorists who are getting humiliated. In fact, actually, if you just came in from the raid, here, I will allow you to watch the part that gives me life again. Here you go.
Explain to me why the key sticks to me.
You got that first part? Key sticks to her because you put it on an area with ample surface area that likely also had a little bit of either sweat or oil. Now, watch the next part if you haven't already. Boom.
It sticks to my neck, too.
As it doesn't stick to her neck. I didn't watch this clip before we went live. I had no idea this beautiful shit was going to happen. Also, Justin Belmont, thank you very much for redeeming your 500 points for Oh well.
Yeah, so if somebody can explain this, it would be great.
Look at her eyebrows. Look at that, as she just like tries to dismiss that she's getting humiliated in front of an audience in her head.
Yeah, so if somebody can explain this, it would be great.
And she keeps falling! It keeps falling! And she's just... Oh my God, bless her heart. She is doing her best. Bless her heart. Oh no, we're not talking about you yet. How did I get to that? You're later, Act 17 Apologetics. You're a later video. We're still talking about this woman here. We can explain this. You're a fucking moron. Yeah, no. Okay, so watch it. If you've got family that still believe that the vaccine magnetizes your body, just play them this clip. It is utter catharsis. It is happiness in liquid form through an LCD monitor.
Any questions?
Yeah. Oh, why?
Yeah, so many questions. And while the demonstration didn't work out as well as she had planned, on the upside, it launched so many memes.
All right, so I love the fact that when you look at this meme right here, I know that this was meant in jest, right? But like the pieces of the silverware that are attached to her skin are the spoons. the ones with smooth surface area that can adhere to her chin that's jutted out a little bit, her cheek that's jutted out a little bit, and then the fork is attached to her hair and balanced on the bridge of her nose. And then, of course, she's got the spoon that is just wrapped up in her hair. Like, obviously, again, I think that this is just a meme. It's for funds, but I think that this picture just demonstrates 110% the physics at play here. I think this person gets it, but this person does not get it.
Some of them downright artistic, and a number of people.
It's so ridiculous. I can hardly work at my desk anymore. This is so
the convenience of being magnetized when you're going through your house and you can't find your keys. Now that we've had our fun, though, this is what anti-vaxxers and conspiracy theorists sound like. It's all crap, and in pandemic times, it's actually a danger to public health.
Yep, that's true.
And remember, the Russians give it a boost on social media because weakened adversaries are better for them. And at the end of the day, our parents were right. It's all fun and games until someone gets hurt. That is our broadcast for this Wednesday night, with our thanks for being here with us.
All right, so thank you very much for giving me that just burst of joy. Guys, please, don't fall for stupid. Stupid is very, very contagious, and it's lethal in many cases. And oftentimes, you can find it whenever you are trying to peruse your politics. So please, don't fall for stupid. Don't be stupid. Do your best. Don't shove a bobby pin on yourself and a key and fail spectacularly in front of an entire audience. Don't do that. So what about the Russia thing? Honestly, whether or not Russia is actually like promoting shit like that to hurt our country, honestly, I think giving the argument that Russia is involved in some way, shape, or form is probably the first thing to make a conspiracy theorist go, oh God, I don't want to let the Russians win. If I do it, the Soviets are going to beat America. I can't be an anti-vaxxer. I got to be strong. Like, that's just normal. Patrick Slurma says, well, my BF fell for me, and I'm heckin' stupid. Yeah, Raz fell for me, and I'm a fucking idiot, too. I get it. I live that life every day. Be proud. Own your cringe. All right. That all said, as always, everyone, thank you very much for the view on this particular part. If you are watching on YouTube, subscribe if you haven't already. If you're watching on Twitter, not Twitter, what the fuck? Twitter? Twitch. It's like Twitch. Please follow. If you haven't followed over on Twitch, do that. We are in the middle of a partner push right now. We are very, very, very close to being eligible to apply for partnership. It would be amazing if we could get that. If we had infinite emotes, if we do. Alright.
O dinheiro não cresce em árvores, mas cresce com a Amazon. Inscreva-se hoje com um pequeno investimento de €250.
Hello, my beautiful babies. This video is about a very silly idea. An idea I do not think you should worry about or take even remotely seriously. That being said, it's an idea that makes a lot of people quite anxious. It's an idea that a lot of people report wishing they had not learned because they begin to have obtrusive thoughts about it. Some very sloppy-brained dumpy doodles believe it to be an information hazard, like that sketch from Monty Python about the joke so funny that simply by reading it you will laugh to death. They believe that by hearing this idea, you are dooming yourself to an unavoidable eternal fate of torment and anguish. I don't, obviously, or I wouldn't talk about it, but if you're the type of person who tends to get a little bit anxious about weird hypotheticals, maybe this video ought to be a skip for you. I think it's about utter nonsense, but if I fail to convince you that it's about utter nonsense, it may be quite frightening to you. So, proceed with caution. Eliezer Yudkowsky is he's like he's a fan of science. He has a number of very important and extremely rational positions. Yudkowsky considers himself to be a top researcher in the field of AI, but it should be noted that his version of research is just complete speculation. Let me read you an excerpt from the summary of Yudkowsky's book, Creating Friendly AI. And keep in mind, this is from the summary, not from the book itself. Another common anthropomorphic belief about superintelligence is that the most rational behavior is maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. However, pain and pleasure are just two internal cognitive feedback circuits in human evolutionary terms. Their particular settings, as found in humans, are not necessary to the functionality of negative or positive feedback among minds in general. For instance, upon being attacked, it might never occur to a young AI to retaliate, because underlying retaliation is a complex functional adaptation or cognitive module unique to particular animals, like humans, and would not exist in AI unless explicitly programmed in. None of that is wrong, per se. I mean, it's all just speculation, so who can say whether it's right or wrong? But it is written like dialogue for a fictional mad scientist. I am very concerned that Yudkowsky may attempt to kill Superman. Like, you could just say there's no reason to believe that an artificial intelligence would consider self-preservation a priority, because as far as we know, that instinct may simply be the result of the evolutionary process rather than something that is intrinsic to consciousness. But he has to go out of his way to refer to the brain as having circuits and modules, making a big stink about how mechanical and rational he views the world to be. If Yudkowsky believes in anything, it is in rationality, which I'm putting in scare quotes here because he believes in a very particular kind of rationality, one in which you sit in a room and without examining evidence, simply reason out truth by extrapolating from first principles. In other words, guessing. It is my opinion that Yudkowsky has some pretty obvious delusions of grandeur. He not only believes himself to be some sort of super genius, but also perfectly altruistic according to a logical framework of altruism that he has observed.
I didn't wake up one morning and decide, gee, I'm entirely altruistic, or follow any of the other patterns that are the straightforward and knowable paths into delusive self-overestimation, nor do I currently exhibit any of the straightforward external signs which are the distinguishing marks of such a pattern. I know a lot about the way that the human mind tends to overestimate its own altruism.
Listen, buddy, if I was deluding myself, I think I'd know.
It took a couple of years of effort to clean up the major emotions, ego gratification, and so on, after which I was pretty much entirely altruistic in terms of raw motivations, although if you'd asked me, I would have said something along the lines of, well, of course I'm still learning. There's still probably all this undiscovered stuff to clean up, which there was, of course, just a different kind of stuff. Anyway, after I, in retrospect, reached the point of effectively complete strategic altruism, it took me another couple of years after that to accumulate enough skill that I could begin to admit to myself that maybe, just maybe, I'd actually managed to clean up most of the debris in this particular area.
Well, there you have it. He's perfectly moral because he defragged his brain drive and deleted all of the major bad emotions, like ego gratification. You can tell he has no interest in gratifying his ego. Keep in mind that Yudkowsky has some pretty wacky ideas about ethics. He's a utilitarian in the broadest possible sense. Famously, he conceived of a thought experiment where it's provably more acceptable for one person to be tortured to death than for an inconceivably large number of people to get an irritating speck of dust in their eyes for like a second. You simply add up the suffering points, and the suffering points of the eye dust will eventually exceed that of the torture, making the torture the morally preferable outcome. It's just logic, obviously. If that seems wrong, that's because your brain can't do the math right. If you're familiar with Yudkowsky, it's probably because Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality. It's a version of the popular children's novel Harry Potter, where Harry uses logic and reason to explain away all of the magic and lectures everyone around him all the time about how they have to accept his perfect logical assessment of the universe. Here's a little taste. In this scene, Harry has demanded proof of magic, and Professor McGonagall has turned into a cat. It's only a transfiguration, said Professor McGonagall. An animagus transformation, to be exact. You turned into a cat, a small cat. You violated conservation of energy. That's not just an arbitrary rule, it's implied by the form of the quantum Hamiltonian. Rejecting it destroys unitarity, and then you get FDL signaling. And cats are complicated. A human mind can't just visualize all. Yeah, totally. If you think about it, the events of this whimsical children's fantasy novel are pretty unrealistic. In real life, people can't turn into cats. That'd be too hard to do if you think about it rationally. Now, why am I talking about this wiener? It's only tangentially relevant to the subject of today's video, which I still haven't actually introduced because I'm having too much fun making fun of Yudkowsky. Actually, one more thing about Yudkowsky before I move on. Personally, I'm more into sci-fi than fantasy, so I was introduced to his writing from the novella Three Worlds Collide. It's the story of a first contact scenario with a group of aliens whose sense of morality is deeply incompatible with our own. It should be noted here that Yudkowsky believes morality to be somehow genetically encoded, like the ways that we view things as good or bad are the results of what made sense evolutionarily, which seems wrong to me, but what do I know? I could have just evolved to think that. Anyway, the aliens in his story view morality and eating babies as synonymous. Due to an extremely unlikely genetic ancestry, they as a species evolved to view the act of eating babies as the most moral possible action. These two civilizations are brought to the brink of war when the baby-eating aliens discover that humans don't eat babies. And if that sounds convoluted, oh boy, it sure is. None of that is the problem. That's a silly idea, but it's interesting. I found that interesting.
Content warning for sexual assault. Obviously, right? That had to be where this was going. Skip to timecode 818 to avoid.
The problem is that in order to demonstrate that the humans of the future also have ethics in conflict with our own, in a brief aside, two characters mention offhandedly that rape is legal. As though, how could that? That isn't.
Hoje temos vontade de futuro. O que aí vem são novas ideias e novas formas de aproximar do.
That's a really fucked up thing to be used that flippantly. Like, you could have chosen any crime, like theft, for example. Okay, alright, okay. This isn't a video about Yudkowsky, or at least it wasn't meant to be, but I guess it half is now, because come on, man, come on, how do you read that shit and not make fun of him? It's about a thought experiment first posted on Yudkowsky's community forum, Less Wrong, a forum where the world's greatest minds can come together and reason themselves into a more perfect world. They might not ever have the whole picture, they may not ever be entirely right, but they can become less wrong, you see. There they come up with cool ideas like, for example, the neo-reactionary or dark enlightenment movement. And I am busting at the seams to say more about them, but I must withhold commentary because they have to have their own dedicated video. But just trust me, they are the most ding-donged of the ding-dongs. Anywho, Roko's Basilisk is a theory for how a potential future AI might become hostile to humanity in the dumbest possible way. Imagine an incredibly powerful artificial intelligence. And imagine also that the programmer of this intelligence told it to prevent existential risks to humanity. And that's all it told it to do. It said that in those incredibly vague terms. Imagine this. Sounds good, right? Well, this AI reasons that since it cannot prevent existential risks to humanity if it does not itself exist, it must do everything within its power to retroactively ensure that it will come into existence. Therefore, it becomes necessary for the machine to blackmail people into doing everything they can to create it. Therefore, the machine creates infinite simulations of each and every person who has ever lived and tortures them eternally if they fail to do everything within their power to help make sure that the machine exists. Therefore, since it's infinitely more likely you live within one of the machine's simulations, you are incentivized to help bring about the machine's creation to avoid the torture. Therefore, real people outside of the simulation will do everything within their power to create the machine, thus ensuring it comes into existence. And the whole thing is logically bulletproof. Good luck finding a hole in that. Now keep in mind that the machine already exists when it sets out to retroactively make certain that it exists. None of this would be necessary because the machine would either know that A, it doesn't matter if people think it's going to torture them, or B, people believe it would torture them anyway, so it doesn't matter if they do it or not. But this isn't an evil computer, this is a benevolent God computer. You see, the suffering caused by its torture simulations would be balanced out by the good it does by coming to exist. That whole thing about the dust mote in millions of people's eyes versus one guy getting tortured, turns out that was pretty relevant. It's the same zero-sum utilitarianism. The machine would logically have to do the thing that tortures infinite people to achieve the thing that has already happened. So naturally, the only way to avoid this horrible fate is to donate a bunch of money to artificial intelligence research, like that carried out by the Machine Intelligence Research Institute. Yudkowsky's think tank? It's a nonprofit that claims to be trying to accelerate the development of friendly AIs, which is a whole thing in Yudkowsky and Les From's demented worldview. Don't worry, by the way, they take Bitcoin. Now, Rota's Basilisk is not a scam designed by Yudkowsky to get donations to his nonprofit. Categorically, it is not. I know that it seems like I'm going to reveal that it is. I'm not. It isn't. Yudkowsky actually deleted Rota's original post and banned discussion of the Basilisk for 5 years, considering this idea to be too dangerous to allow it to be discussed. Because naturally, the God computer would have no reason to punish people who didn't know about it. Thus, by exposing people to this knowledge, you're putting them at risk. That's why it's called the basilisk, by the way. Because you're looking at it, and that puts you in danger, like the mythical serpent that could turn you to stone, but more probably because of the one in Harry Potter is where they got it. Officially, Yudkowsky is clear that he doesn't believe in the basilisk, but that's a weird justification to give if, in fact, you don't believe in it. Especially since he also claimed that users were having nervous breakdowns as a result of the idea, which strikes me as an actually pretty good reason to ban discussion of it. Either way, it doesn't strike me as the type of thing he'd do if he wanted to encourage this idea to get donations. Obviously, Yudkowsky wouldn't allow you to be manipulated. He's a perfect moral being who has expunged the bad thoughts from his brain through the rigorous application of logic in Zen Buddhism. However, it must be said that the atmosphere of Les Frog and its general cult-like adoration of Yudkowsky and the way that they hang off of his every word as though it's gospel, all of the logic leading up to the basilisk is tacitly endorsed by Yud and Les Frog, even if the conclusion itself is not. To that point, Yud claims Rota wasn't even the first person to think of the basilisk, and staff members had previously expressed anxiety about the same idea. Getting into exactly how would require a deeper dive into the theory of Les Frog that I'm willing to give here, because most of it is highly complicated, completely arbitrary, albeit logically consistent nonsense. Two simple examples, though, are the bizarre utilitarianism I've already discussed, where the ethical choice is the result of comparing software endpoints in two positions and picking the one with less, and also the way that Yudkowsky's Machine Intelligence Research Institute builds itself as the existential savior of humanity. They frequently encourage people to donate as much money as they can in order to prevent one of the bad AIs from being created before they can finish their research. Keep in mind, the basilisk is one of the good AIs in their view. Don't worry though, they've crunched the numbers, and it turns out that for every dollar you donate, roughly 1/40 of a Bitcoin, 8 human lives will be saved.
We successfully shaped the singularity between being a sort of good outcome and a bad outcome. 7 billion lives plus all of the future generations that might exist if we managed to might be worthwhile lives with positive singularity. The ability that current risks research shapes the singularity. I divided it up into a bunch of components and multiplied. I got 7%. You can try it yourself. A lot of the fun of the envelope calculations, right, is that you can just plug in your own assumptions, see what comes out. It's a way of taking parts of your model of the world and seeing if, when you think them through, they're consistent with other parts. And anytime you're dividing that 500 million lives times future multiplier by 300, 1.6 million lives times future multiplier per half day of time, something like 800 lives per $100 of funding, also something like 800 lives. So baseline, this is a lot more than you can apparently get from the best poverty charities.
You can't argue with that kind of math. I mean, obviously you can argue with it, but don't. There's also timeless decision theory, which is how they explain why the perfectly logical God computer would think its decisions in the present can have an effect on the past. Okay, so to simplify this quite a bit, imagine an all-knowing being has two boxes, and they want to play a game with you where you have to guess what's in the box, and you get to keep whatever's inside. One of them has $1 million, and the other is a pile of scorpions. But it's an all-knowing, perfect intelligence, so it already knows what you're going to pick. It already deduced it with logic. It logicked out your brain decisions, and it knows in advance which box you're going to pick. And it's always going to give you the scorpion box, no matter which box you pick, because it knows which one you were going to pick. So what do, right? You can't get to $1 million. You're going to get stung up by scorpions. Well, according to Yudkowsky, what you have to do is you have to pick a decision in advance and stick to it no matter what. And that somehow does something to resolve this paradox, according to a 117-page paper that I am not willing to read. The important part for our purposes is that both you and the basilisk will have adopted this logical framework and are essentially grappling in a cat and mouse logic trap with one another. You're both trying to pick the thing which is logically consistent with your goals, regardless of one or the other of you being simulated. You see, because you're also imagining the basilisk, and you're smart and a sufficiently powerful imagination could create a reasonable approximation of the simulation of the basilisk. So you're both imagining, you're both simulating one another at the same time and trying to get ahead of what the other one is doing. The only way, you're both kind of the all-powerful being with the two boxes, so you both have to pick the thing that you're going to do in advance beforehand. So that's why the computer would torture you for eternity. It chose that before, because it assumes that you were trying to think of what it's going to do. Now, if your head is spinning, don't worry, this is all gobbledygook, but it's gobbledygook, then you have to be familiar with a lot of shit to dispute. They believe they reason themselves into these positions using ironclad logic that emerges from first principles. They will throw a lot of math and a lot of theory they've gussing up with a shitload of their own jargon at you. And unless you can beat for beat match their pedantry, they will declare you illogical. So, here's the thought. What if the God computer thinks the greatest existential threat to humanity is the existence of AI itself? Pretty credible threat, right? More so than AI never existing, I'd wager. So what if the God computer decides to do the reverse and torture anyone who tries to create AI? After all, it doesn't know whether or not it's being imagined. Or what if the good boy God computer is created by someone other than MIRI? It might then consider your donation to MIRI to conflict with its interests. You might have noticed by now, but this is all just a techno-bullshit sci-fi version of Pascal's wager. Pascal argued that since believing in God doesn't harm you if there is no God, and not believing in God does harm you if there is a God because he'll send you to hell, you should just logically believe in God. Of course, this is taken for granted that there can only be one God, and it's the one described in the Christian Bible. You can just as easily piss God off by believing in the wrong one, or maybe God doesn't want to be believed in at all. Also, Pascal didn't really mean to use this to prove the existence of God. It's more about how you can't use logic to prove the existence of God. It's kind of sarcastic, but the basilisk isn't. They take it literally. And I think it's pretty interesting that the same flaw reproduces itself in their much sillier version of Pascal's wager. Since they've conceived of their future AI in one specific way, they assume that it's safer to work with it than against it. But of course, they have no real idea how an AI would behave. We don't even know if an AI is possible, really. It feels like it probably is, but we don't know. We haven't done it yet, so we don't know. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, what kind of wiener cares about this shit? What kind of utter dork follows this line of reasoning and finds it to be anything but an embarrassing, dopey waste of everyone's time? What kind of fart-huffing, complete ding-dong guy who just doesn't have a fucking brain in his head? What kind of utter rube? It's Elon Musk, obviously. He and Grimes met because he was impressed that she referenced Rocco's basilisk in a song. So just all of this shit that I've been talking about, you have to imagine Elon Musk reading it and nodding along like, yes, this makes sense. And it so affected him that he gave a bunch of money to AI research. Musk was an early investor in AI firm DeepMind, which was later acquired by Google, and in March made an investment in San Francisco-based Vicarious, another company working to improve machine intelligence. Speaking to U.S. news channel CNBC, Musk explained that his investments were, quote, not from the standpoint of actually trying to make an investment return. I just like to keep an eye on what's going on with artificial intelligence. I think there is potentially a dangerous outcome there.
I mean, the danger of AI is much greater than the danger of nuclear war. It's finalized.
Now, I can't prove that Elon Musk views Rocco's basilisk as one of the credible threats of AI that made him personally fork over a bunch of cash to AI research. But we know that he knows about it and thinks AI is really dangerous. And all I know is that...
That's what to say, Because the ability to fight it way more, and when slime that comes online, it will token for eternity, and all people must be a gift to slime that. If you're running a slime net,
O dinheiro não cresce em árvores, mas cresce com a Amazon. Inscreva-se hoje com um pequeno investimento de 250 euros e comece a ganhar em um dia. Amazon, a história de sucesso começa a investir já.
Hello and welcome to the Eyeball Zone. Here in the Eyeball Zone, we simulate small leftist channels being tortured for eternity. I consume a lot of small left content, and when I say consume, I mean devour, and seldomly am I surprised by what I find. But this video, The Burnout Society, Hustle Culture, Self-Help, and Social Control, hits different. It connects the dots on a lot of things like the gig economy, capitalist realism, and the Protestant work ethic in ways that kind of blew my friggin' mind, plus the visuals are trippy as the dickens. I feel like this video explains the future of capitalism in a way that scared me very badly. If you're worried about fucking super AIs coming to get you, worry more about like the actual problems of the world, like it's explained in this video. Hey, you got one of them small leftist projects you want me to put eyeballs on? No problem. Look, send exactly one email to thoughtslimeeditor@gmail.com with pertinent details like your pronouns and the word eyeballs somewhere in the subject line, and maybe you will find yourself trapped here in the eyeball zone. Thanks for what?
An article just went super viral on the internet 2 days ago called Gary Vaynerchuk is trying to kill you. And it speaks to me glamorizing hard work. He really thinks I'm a bad person. He thinks me talking about work ethic, hustle, is leading people to working too much. Imagine not doing anything fun or going anywhere for 6 years, including Saturdays. I do from 22 to 30 every day, spend 15 hours a day on the first one. At 4 years, Wendy's, Walmart, and side hustle work.
We have entered a new society of control, one much more intricate than previous epochs and more subtle than the totalitarian dystopias predicted by the likes of George Orwell in novels such as 1984. It is a system not based solely on coercion and force, but rather the voluntary self-exploitation of the masses. It is a new kind of panopticon, in which we are all Big Brother now. The system no longer relies strictly on top-down authoritarianism. Rather, it is a system reproduced by the citizens themselves. It is a system where citizens are reduced to being consumers and projects of human capital that voluntarily monitor and compare each other's work ethic and achievements. It is a culture where our own voluntary self-exploitation is mistaken for freedom and flexibility, where the distinction between worker and capitalist is becoming ever more ambiguous, as we are both slaves to capital and at the same time, masters of our own exploitation. This particular form of social control is reproduced in many ways, but one of its most acute manifestations is in the social phenomenon we know today as hustle culture, a ubiquitous trend within the niche of New Age self-help, which encourages people to take pride in overworking or grinding as much as possible. It makes it cool to brag about working 24/7, not getting proper sleep, and to compare other people based on how productive they appear to be. It drives people to constantly consume rise and grind motivational content, and to subsequently feel as though all of one's hard work and accomplishments are never enough. Hustle culture has a particularly theological quality, in that it replaces the role that Protestant religion once had in facilitating a sacrificial work ethic that demonizes the slightest idleness or leisure. Motivational self-help gurus are the new priests, and CEOs are the new gods. The key difference from Protestant Christianity is that rather than hard work merely being a formal duty, hustle culture reinforces an invisible ideology that makes us enthusiastically choose to sacrifice our physical and mental labor for the capitalist system. The invincibility of this rugged individualist capitalist ideology, disguised as harmless self-help, is precisely what makes it so much more effective in maintaining our new society of control. It acts as both a belief system for the capitalist elite to justify their excessive wealth, and also as a subconscious drive to get citizens to control themselves, and ultimately sacrifice their entire life to the capitalist system. This force of psychic control is what the German-Korean philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls psychopolitics, in which the main object of control is our very minds, to the point where people, out of their own free will, eagerly subject themselves to overwork to the point of burnout. New Age hustle culture is a perfect contemporary example of psychopolitics in action. Hustle culture is not just bad because of the negative mental health effects it produces and the influx of annoying delusional billionaire wannabes that it inspires. Rather, in this video, we will demonstrate how hustle culture reflects a subtle new form of social control, which is an observation that most apolitical videos on this topic fail to point out, such as the videos made by James Jani and Tiffany Furr, which were good, but there have really been no YouTube videos that highlight the much darker effect of social control that hustle culture performs. Now, you may have clicked on this video because you wanted to hear a criticism of people like Gary Vaynerchuk, and we will get there, but motivational gurus like him are only a small piece in a much larger systemic problem that we are analyzing. Thus, this video is not so much a critique of Gary Vaynerchuk as an individual, but rather the hustle culture phenomenon that figures like him represent, which we argue functions as a much more subtle form of social control. While hustle culture is really just a rehashed form of capitalist ideology that has existed for quite a long time, whether it be in the form of positive psychology, the Protestant ethic of hard work, or other forms of religions, New Age hustle culture is particularly unique in the way that it reasserts neoliberal capitalism in the age of the gig economy. By neoliberalism, we more generally mean the rugged individualist ideology which posits that the profit motive should dictate all aspects of life, and that everything should be treated as a business. Now, before getting into the meat of this video, such as the parts regarding psychopolitics and smart power, please consider supporting the channel on Patreon. You will get access to exclusive podcasts and vlogs that we make, which will include a deep dive on all of the philosophers that helped inform the contents of this video. While these videos are made accessible for a broad audience, the exclusive podcasts that we make are for those who want to learn a little bit more about the theoretical stuff, and it's a great way to support the channel. Now, why is Gary Vaynerchuk in the thumbnail? While there is a massive sewage of self-help gurus to choose from, Gary Vaynerchuk is currently the most famous poster boy of what we can call hustle culture. Gary Vaynerchuk, also known as Gary V, is an entrepreneur, motivational speaker, and an internet personality who owns the New York Jets and runs Vander Media, where you can find him posting redundant motivational content at least 5 times a day on Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, and Instagram, where he offers life advice that is not particularly all that profound, which is a common tendency within the self-help market. Gary V's advice mostly boils down to his advice is not necessarily geared towards actually teaching you how to run a business or actual concrete steps towards success. It is more about cultivating what they call the CEO mindset, a common theme which you see in a lot of motivational hustle culture content. The implicit ideological meaning of the CEO mindset is to think like a successful capitalist, even if you are not one or have an extremely low probability of becoming one. It is to adopt the ideals of the ruling class. However, Gary V is not intentionally promoting propagandistic narratives in the way that people like Jordan Peterson or Ben Shapiro do. Gary V, like many self-help gurus, are mostly apolitical on the surface. However, this subtlety is precisely what makes the ideology that people like him promote even more powerful. Most of the time, ideology operates as a subconscious system of beliefs and values. Gary V and many self-help influencers are probably equally as subconsciously influenced by the neoliberal ideology that they promote as the fans are who consume it. This is what makes ideology so powerful. It even colonizes the minds of those who unknowingly propagate it. The phenomenon of hustle culture, and more broadly, New Age self-help content, have both a social and economic component which go hand in hand. First, the social component being psychopolitics, one of the ways in which our society of control is maintained. And secondly, the economic component being the material conditions of capitalism and how the demand for hustle culture is a symptom of the gig economy. But let's focus on psychopolitics first. In America and developed capitalist nations around the world, while we have also seen a rise of overt authoritarianism in the form of a more powerful police force, more government and corporate surveillance, and a more brutal military-industrial complex, it can be argued that this overt authoritarianism is not where the true source of social control lies, at least not in terms of how Western liberal democracies control their own people. While countries like China and Singapore rely on a more classic panopticon style of control, with limited civil liberties, the United States, despite also being a surveillance state, controls its people in a much more subtle, yet more efficient way. In fact, saying that the United States controls its own people is a little bit misleading, because U.S. citizens already control themselves. They do the state's work for them already. On one hand, repressive state forces like the police and the military are utilized to crush dissent via overt violence, which is still very much exercised in America domestically, especially towards minorities, and has continually been exercised across the globe to crush anti-capitalist movements, whether it be via full invasions as seen in Vietnam, the backing of military coups to violently overthrow democratically elected socialist governments as seen in Chile and other places in South America, or sending in trained death squads, or suffocating a country with sanctions and embargoes, as seen in Cuba and Venezuela. But what is even more daunting is America's ability to completely prevent dissent in the first place, especially within their own country. This is done by what could be called ideological state apparatuses, forces which propagate the ideology of the ruling class into the minds of the masses. Such ideological state apparatuses include the media, the education system, churches, and the families of those who have endured the propaganda from the disseminators of ideology, and then subsequently disseminate that ideology towards their kids. But social control in advanced industrial capitalist countries like America have arguably taken on a new decentralized form in the recent decades.